Okay, today I'm going to show you how to make communion bread. I'm going to start by preheating my oven to 375, and then it will be preheating while we get everything else ready. It just is 4 basic ingredients. All-purpose flour, don't use self-rising because that has leaven in it. I'm using olive oil, but you could use butter or shortening or corn oil instead, or vegetable oil. Salt and water. I'm going to start with my bowl, and I'm going to put 1/2 of a cup of all-purpose flour in there. Then I'm going to put about 1/4 to 1/2 a teaspoon of salt. Some people might just call it a dash. I'm just putting, there it is in my hand, putting it in there. You can leave that out or use more or less to your taste. And I'm using my pastry cutter, but you could use a fork instead just to kind of mix that salt in. Next, I'm going to add the olive oil. If you don't have this much olive oil, you can just add a tablespoon or a tablespoon and a half. Basically what you want to happen here, there's 1 tablespoon. You want it to be kind of like crumb-like. So use your judgment on how much you need. It may just take a tablespoon and a half. But I've put 2 tablespoons down for you. I'm using olive oil just because I think that's probably what they would have used in Bible times to make their unleavened bread. If they added anything, they might have just done water with the flour and salt. Okay, so it looks kind of crumbly, like a crumb-like consistency now. That's what you want it to look like before you add the water. Now you're going to add the water slowly. You might not use all of it. So I just have a bowl of water here, but you could do it under your faucet. So I'm adding a tablespoon, and I'm going to go ahead and stir that in and see what it's like. You want this to turn out being like a Play-Doh consistency, but don't play with it a lot like Play-Doh because then it'll get tough and chewy, kind of rubbery. It's going to need a little bit more. I'm not going to put the whole extra tablespoon in at this point. If you want that flaky consistency where it'll break well, you don't want to mess with it too much. Okay, so this is about the texture I want. If I'm working with it and rolling it out and it's not quite pliable enough, then we can add just a little bit more water. Okay, at this point you want to dust your surface. I'm just using a glass cutting board, but you can clean your countertop and use that instead. Just dust your surface, dust your hands a little bit, and your rolling pin. Of course, as with the answer to any question or problem right now, wash your hands before you start this, which I did. Okay, you don't have to take all of it at once. Put it on your surface and roll it out thin. You want it to be really, really thin. Think pie crust thin, or even a little bit thinner. Now, just to make it nice and pretty at this point, I have a glass that I'm also going to dust with the flour and cut it. You could also use a cookie cutter or something like that just to make it pretty and round. And I'm going to put it, I made a cookie sheet out of foil just because it's nice and thin and lets the heat go through quickly. And you can continue with all of yours. This will make quite a bit. I like to, at this point, score it a little bit with a pizza cutter. This makes it so that when you finish baking it, You'll have individual pieces to pick up. If you want to just break it off, it should break off well too, because it'll be nice and flaky like a pie crust. But these will be individual little pieces if you'd like it that way, especially right now when we're not wanting to touch other people's food. And then you just bake it for, the last batch I did took about 13 minutes at 375, just until it looks a little bit golden. Make sure that it looks dry. And there you have your communion bread, your unleavened bread at home. I just pulled this out of the oven, and over here it's getting a little brown on top. You could stick it back in for another minute or two, but it's nice and flaky, and so it's breakable at this point. Let it cool before you use it or eat it. You can store it in, once it's cool, you can store it like in a food storage container, or if you want to freeze it, if you've made a big batch, you can freeze it just in a food storage bag, and then use it when you're ready. It's nice and flaky, and it's essentially a pie crust recipe too, so if you like it, it would be great with a pot pie as well. So I hope this helps you in this time when you're at home, and I hope you have what you need around home, and enjoy.